Hello. Thank you for this amazing invitation. My name is Ezel Buse Sönmezocak. I'm the Advocacy Coordinator at Women for Women's Human Rights Association, WWHR. I'm also an international human rights lawyer, and I've been engaged with women's and LGBTI women in Turkey for more than 15 years, I guess. We will do this interview with my colleague Yıldız. Yıldız, would you like to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you, Ezel. Hello again. My name is Yıldız. I am Advocacy Officer in WWHR. Well, actually, I have defined myself as a feminist since high school. I was born in Cyprus, where I was involved queer organization in there. So I also worked on feminist theory when I writing my master thesis. So I have been working organizations in women organization last 4 years, I think. Before WWHR, I always worked in a political participation of women in Turkey. So today I work on advocacy about gender equality.
It's a very tricky question indeed, because to start with, I should say the situation about Turkey when it comes to gender equality is a little bit tricky or contradictory, I can say, because on paper we have very good, very strong laws when it comes to gender equality. But the real problem is the implementation. There's a very huge gap between the implementation and the current law. Okay, so on paper, yes, law exists. So we have pretty good laws on paper, but the problem is the law is not effectively implemented. And this is because I think this is because of the lack of political will. Okay, so gender equality in Turkey is not seen as a political is not seen like a value that you have to fight for. Okay, at the political level or social level. So, for instance, equality between men and women, for instance, is not embraced. On the contrary, we see open resistance from the very high political level. I mean, the president himself, for instance, he clearly said that he doesn't believe the equality between men and women. So, or I mean, look at the debates around Istanbul Convention that we experience. So, this is, I mean, it clearly showed that gender equality, the debates around the Istanbul Convention, it clearly showed that gender equality was framed as a threat. Okay, framed as a threat. So as a result, yes, we have law, but law is not enough if it is not implemented well. So because without political commitments, institutional commitments, and political will, the law is just on the paper and it's empty words. And unfortunately, yeah, the problem is not the absence of law, but the absence of political motivation on gender equality and political motivation on implementing the law for women, for gender equality, not against women. Okay. Yes, indeed. Public feminist movement, I can say, against violence against women in Turkey began in the late 90s. And one of the major movements in feminist movement in Turkey was the first march against violence organized by women in Istanbul. And it was late 90s. And it was a public demonstration where women publicly challenged the very basic idea that false allegation that violence was a private issue within the family. And women took the streets and said that no, it's not a private issue. It's not about family, and it's a political. Okay, so. These years, I mean, the late 90s were also the very same years where our organizations, WWHR or Mor Çatı Women Foundation, I mean, these kind of huge feminist foundations and organizations were founded. So from the very beginning, violence against women has been a very central issue for the feminist movement in Turkey. And indeed, over the years, over the decades, feminists kept this issue visible through protests, huge demonstrations taking place in streets, legal advocacy, lobbying, both in international and national level. And especially after the Istanbul Convention, after the Turkey ratified Istanbul Convention, advocacy, feminist advocacy and campaigns became more focused on structural gaps, especially the lack of official data on violence and the absence of legal definition of femicide. So these gaps were consistently, raised both at local and national as well as international level by Turkish feminists. Because state failed to act, women's organizations began documenting femicides themselves and monitoring court cases. So, and these long-standing campaigns and feminist struggle, I can say, has been key to keeping violence against women and femicide on the public agenda and framing them as political. But I mean, at the end of the day, femicide as an independent crime is not still it's not still in the Turkish Penal Code. It's we have another crime. I mean, but it's not specifically femicide, backing the idea that murdering because of the sex itself. It is not still not on the law. One of the main areas the feminist organizations we focused on the structural gaps around femicides and the cultural, I mean, the understanding, false allegations around honor, so-called honor. And as I said, in Turkey, first thing first, femicide is not still defined as a independent crime in the law. Killing of women, I mean, what we have at the law right now, killing a woman can receive aggravated sentences, okay, if the victim is a woman. But there is no gender perspective here. And that's why I'm saying that there is no femicide in the Turkish Penal Code. There is no gender perspective, so there is no legal recognition that women are killed because they are women. So this is the idea. So the missing part in the Turkish law, and this distinction is crucial, as we know. So what exists is not femicide as understood in international human rights law, indeed. And even though the government, presented this change, it's because this change was made very few years ago. It's a very new, I can say. And the government presented this small word game, maybe, as a huge reform. And they presented, look, did we introduce femicide into the Turkish Penal Code? But it was not true. And in practice, in practice, serious problems remain in implementation. So regarding the honor killing, so-called honor and honor killing, it's another very long and important struggle in Turkish feminist history. Indeed, honor killings, so-called honor killings, were a very major issue in Turkey for decades, maybe since 80s. Through persistent feminist advocacy and especially with strong backing from repeated CEDAW committee recommendations. I mean, I think this is important because in that time period, feminist movements used CEDAW committee's recommendation on so-called honor killings very effectively to the government. They said, look, I mean, this is not the first, this is not the second, but this is repeatedly, coming from the CEDAW committee that you expel these shameful provisions on so-called honor killings. And yes, we succeeded. We were finally able to change the legal approach. Today, honor is no longer, accepted as a mitigating factor. On the contrary, it's an aggravating circumstances. So it's increasing the punishment if the perpetrator says no. It was my country, my honor, or blah blah blah, etc. This kind of argumentation is not accepted, and if it comes from the perpetrator, then the punishment will be increased. And as a strategy, I can say CEDAW committee was very effective. It's shame. It's a huge shame. I'm deeply regret. I'm deeply sorry. Still, we have to answer these questions. Still, we don't have our convention. Still, we are, we are not under protection of Istanbul Convention, and it's a huge shame. And it's another, I mean, the fact that Turkey was the very first country in the world withdraw from an international human rights treaty. It's another shame. And actually doing this, I think the government, first of all, said that, okay, I'm withdrawing from my obligation, my obligation to protect women from violence. That's why I'm talking about lack of political will, because this is very political. This is a very clear political message, especially to the ground, to the police officers, to the prosecution office, saying that gender equality and violence against women and domestic violence is not that much important that you have to fight for. I mean, this was the political message behind this withdrawal. So that's why it, of course, very badly affected the implementation, which were already missing, already ineffective, So especially after the withdrawal, yes, we saw very bad misimplementation examples from the police stations. Also, I can clearly say that the reports showing that especially violence against LGBTIs were, alarmingly increasing after the Istanbul Convention, because the official argument was that, I mean, for the withdrawal was that Istanbul Convention was used by LGBTIs to promote homosexuality. I'm quoting, of course. So it was another shame. I mean, the Turkey withdrawn from an international human rights law agreement by, discriminating another group of citizens. So I mean, a lot of things to say, but I'm stopping here.
Well, actually, as Ezel said, this was a political message, and this political message is implemented our other rights also. So actually, what we are witnessing in Turkey is not just backsliding. It's actually a consolidation of an organized state-supported anti-gender movement. State-supported groups such as divorced fathers groups or family platforms and various men's groups like that. Actually, these actors have been used to manufacture social resistance against women's rights. gender equality and feminist gains. Even though many rights still exist in papers, women's access to these rights, it's increasingly limited in practice, actually. In addition, women's rights, such as alimony and heritage, have been openly questioned by men groups in public. So actually, they won't create a public support for legal changes that would weaken our rights. Most recently, a draft law was brought to the public agent is official, systematic, and openly hostile to women's and LGBTQ rights. This anti-gender politics openly targets women's hard-won rights. And we know that, actually. Gender equality is deliberately framed as a threat to the family, to society, and they won't create a public support, all anti-gender actors like other countries. And this was started when withdrawal the Istanbul Convention. That was a first anti-gender attack in legal area. And the reason of withdrawal the Istanbul Convention, as I said, promotion of homosexuality, and that was shame for our country, actually. But this was not an isolated decision. It marked the normalization of anti-gender ideology as a state policy. But women and feminist and LGBTQR organizations continue to organize big campaigns and resist these reforms or these attacks and this backlash. Well, actually, the feminist movement is always transnational. For example, our Turkish civil code was a major feminist achievement in Turkey. And sharing the strategies and lessons from that process can be very valuable for the other feminist movements and working on similar reforms. Actually, in Turkey, we actively work to share experiences and learn from women's movement in the other countries. For example, we also learn strategies with other feminists because, for example, last month we organized a conference on abortion and listened to experiences from France, Argentina, Tunisia, and Romania. Not only listen experiences, but also learn strategies about, for example, advocacy of abortion, like that. So our aim to strengthen international feminist solidarity because patriarchal oppression crosses borders and feminist resistance must do the same.
Maybe I could briefly add this. I mean, in the region, in the Swana and Mina region, I think civil codes, as just Yıldız said, is very important because the civil code is the main legal code framing the place of women in public, right? Because if the civil codes in a country is more egalitarian in terms of gender equality, then the place and public appearance of women as an independent individual in the public is becoming more equal and egalitarian. So maybe working on, and I personally know that in many countries right now, feminist movements, women's organizations are trying to reform their own civil codes. So maybe working together on this, and sharing our own strategies and own experiences on our own civil codes and the, cultural and especially I'm sorry, the religion, religion-based and cultural-based, false ideas, shaping the the social norms on gender issues, So maybe working on civil codes in the region or sharing the strategies, our experiences might be very useful, because personally I would love to hear what's going on, for instance, Tunisia, when it comes to civil code, or in other countries, because as I said, it's a very common thing, coming from cultural and religion-based stereotypes and discrimination. So yeah, maybe personally, I just wanted to add this. Thank you so much.